Hello and welcome to Faith and Spirituality in a Time of Crisis. My name is Chris Fuller. I'm the Chief Sponsorship and Mission Integration Officer at St. Joseph's College of Maine. And this is a series of conversations with local faith leaders, theologians, philosophers, and others around the country about how we're adapting spiritually in the challenges we face regarding the coronavirus. So my guest in this episode is Sara Ewing-Merrill. Alan is the executive director of the BTS Center in Portland, Maine. Alan, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining me. So, Alan, I asked you to talk a little bit about the BTS Center, but why don't you share with us a little bit about yourself first? How did you come into this arena of working in theology and ministry?
Sure. Well, I'm a United Methodist. I grew up in United Methodist in kind of mid-coast Maine. Taught high school English for a few years and then went off to seminary, which was how I felt God calling me as a young adult, even through my college years. Graduated from Boston University School of Theology and was ordained as a United Methodist pastor. For the past 20 years, I've been serving local churches. I served in Hudson, Massachusetts for 7 years. And then for the past 12 years, co-pastoring with my wife, Sara, a United Methodist church here in Portland, Maine, called HopeGateWay. And sort of it was a natural kind of sidestep after 12 years of ministry in this place to take on this role as executive director of the BTS Center when that opportunity became available, and just really grateful to be in ministry now with this organization.
That's great. So tell us a little about the BTS. BTS stands for Bangor Theological Seminary.
Well, sort of it used to. It's a hearkening back to
Okay.
what it used to be. Yeah.
Okay. So what are the origins of the BTS Center?
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting question and one that we get a lot. BTS doesn't actually stand for anything anymore, but it is a remembering of we're sort of building on the legacy of, or we're the missional successor to the former Bangor Theological Seminary, which was founded in 1814. And for almost 200 years, until 2013, it was a seminary that awarded degrees: Masters of Divinity, Masters of Theological Studies, Doctor of Ministry degrees. So Bangor Seminary trained, thousands and thousands of pastors serving churches around, especially around northern New England. It was affiliated with the United Church of Christ. And then in 2013, the Board of Trustees made a really difficult decision that was several years in the making, probably. Looking at enrollment data, struggling with the declining enrollment and the changing nature of every parachurch organization, and made the difficult decision to suspend degrees. And so kind of really shifted from being a traditional seminary with a campus and a faculty and a library and a student body and all of the rest, into what we now are, a private operating foundation with a mission to catalyze spiritual imagination with enduring wisdom for transformative faith leadership. So today that looks like continuing education, professional development for not just clergy, but for people of faith, faith leaders broadly construed, to be effective in ministry in the 21st century, which doesn't look like ministry in 1814 or even ministry in 1914. So really exploring the changing landscape of the church, of religious practice, and thinking about what faith leaders need to be effective and faithful in ministry.
That's interesting. So, and you mentioned your own history in ministry. So, especially the challenges of ministry in the 21st century. So, given your experience in working in ministry and now running the center, how does ministry look different now? Aside from even talking about the coronavirus, right? And all the circumstances preceding that, just the work you've undertaken. How does ministry look different now than it does even when you started in ministry?
Well, so first thing to note is that Maine is, depending on which inventory you're looking at, the least religious state in the country. That's according to the most recent religious statistics. And we sort of compete back and forth with New Hampshire and Vermont and the Pacific Northwest. But certainly it's not a given that people will belong to any kind of religious community in the Northeast here. The days when people would move into town and immediately find a church, those days are long gone. In fact, it's atypical. It's very much out of the norm that people are actively part of a faith community. And yet I think there is still a profound interest in all things spiritual. I think especially in moments of crisis like the one where we're facing, people are asking, big existential questions. And we want to equip faith communities to be the kind of communities where people can go with those big questions and explore, matters of life and death, and really what it means to not only to practice one's faith individually, but to be a part of a community, and to be really paying attention to the needs of the world and putting our faith into action in ways that have an impact in the world. And I think it's in every possible way. The practice of faith is different than it used to be. And the skills that I learned in seminary 20 years ago are not the skills necessarily that pastors need today to be effective in ministry. So this is sort of unfolding a little at a time. We're sort of really thinking about what that means.
Certainly. And then, of course, the current circumstances regarding the outcomes or the results of the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah.
The sheltering in place, which here in Maine, we are experiencing right now, as are many states across the country, resulting in church communities not being able to, those churches that have communities closing their doors physically, but trying to find other ways. So what additional layer of challenge has that added? Do you see from your vantage point in terms of the kind of work that you're trying to do through the BTS Center?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a really fascinating time that probably we'll be reflecting on for decades. The way I'm thinking about it is, the church has left the building. It's not that the church is closed, but in many ways, the church has been deployed for this particular moment. And while I think it is true that this moment stretches and stresses clergy and all faith leaders in really unique ways, I also think it's heartening and encouraging, in some ways even exciting. I'm using that word term very carefully because I'm not serving a local church at the moment. As an outsider watching it happen, it's exciting to see the ways that faith leaders and faith communities are responding to this moment. I'm thinking of it as a time of forced innovation. And innovation is always to be celebrated, but in this particular moment, people are not choosing innovation. They're finding themselves, being forced to find ways to innovate, but they're doing it. And what I'm seeing is really, really exciting and encouraging in spite of the many obstacles.
Yeah, one of the things that in several of my conversations has come up is whether it be talking about ministry or even talking about broader topics like thinking theologically or philosophically, is that this is a moment that also presents us with opportunities as well.
Absolutely.
Opportunities to think more reflectively, opportunities to think more theologically. What opportunities do you see then for faith communities coming through this experience?
Sure. Well, the most obvious one is figuring out how to use technology more effectively. And that is an opportunity and a challenge. Some faith leaders are sort of already predisposed to kind of, experiment with technology and have been doing that for a while. And so this just feels like an exciting new opportunity. Others are just, kind of way back, finding their way through and, appealing to the graces of the younger folks in their congregation to help them figure it out. But I'm seeing some real experimentation. The church that I'm a part of, which is ironically the church that I served for 12 years, my wife Sara is still the lead pastor, so it's still my faith community, has moved worship to Zoom. And instead of seeing that as like less than or somehow second best or better than nothing, the way the community is experiencing it in many ways is as a really rich and sacred time that we're gathering together. I'm sure everyone will be anxious to move back to in-person worship the moment we're able to do that. But in the meantime, we still have over 100 people that are gathering on Sunday mornings. And what's unique about it is we're actually looking at each other in the eyes. We're not sitting passively in a congregation staring at something happening in the front. We are looking each other in the eyes. And because it's on Zoom, it's not live streamed. It's not, so people aren't passively observing something happening somewhere else. It's happening in real time. We're able to share leadership. So many, many different voices taking a lead. There's sharing of celebrations and concerns with one another. It's a little bit clunky. We're having to unmute people and mute people and all that kind of stuff. So it's clunky, but it's really beautiful. The messiness of it is beautiful. And although I know this is controversial in some circles, we're celebrating communion together. So we invite people to have some bread and to have some grape juice or wine or beverage. We have a different theology than the Catholic theology around that. But we're communing together. And as we receive the bread and receive the cup, we're looking into each other's eyes. It's really, in my experience, that's really powerful.
That's interesting, because I think it raises then, like, one of those opportunities that comes from that is when the opportunity returns to gather together, how can we think about ways of fostering, yes, time for worship, but also time for that face-to-face interaction with each other, the furthering of opportunities to build community with one another, right? That worship engenders, but has to be carried forward, right? Worship can become a catalyst for, but how do we carry that forward?
One thing I think is interesting is, while this moment does reveal and in some ways amplify the disparities. For example, some people have access to a computer and high-speed internet and can easily access that, while others don't. We're trying to make it available for people to call in on the telephone and that kind of thing as well, and mailing them things in U.S. mail. It also, in some ways, lowers the barrier. So people who maybe have physical access challenges and aren't able to come to worship are able to worship in the same way everyone else is. So it makes me wonder, how can we apply the learning that we have, received over this time and continue it, so that people who can't get out on Sunday mornings, or maybe, we have some immigrant members of our community who are working overnight in personal care situations. So they're actually at a client's home. They can still log on from client's home while they're working. It's permissible. They can't come to our physical spot on Sunday morning, but they're able to log on and participate by Zoom. So how can we continue some of what we've learned, which in many ways expands access for people, so that we're continuing to build the body of Christ and make it possible for people to participate in different ways. And I think that's true, for in all kinds of situations where people are not able to engage in the traditional, but are able to engage in sort of the alternative expressions. Yeah.
That's great. So let's talk about the BTS Center then. The BTS Center also is marshaling its resources to provide opportunities for conversation, reflection about the coronavirus and the impact of it, and thinking about that as a community. So can you share with us, like, how is the BTS Center addressing it? What kind of resources is it providing?
Sure. So we've been thinking a lot since I stepped into this role, which was in July. I've been urging our board of trustees and all of our constituents to begin thinking about kind of the changing nature of religious practice and the ways in which some of the skewed values of Western society have actually been, have been a problem for the church. In many ways, I think the coronavirus is a symptom of all that's been kind of misaligned in our society that have led us to this place. So anyway, we have kind of hit the pause button on a lot of the projects we were working on, and really kind of shifted to think of ourselves as a resource for supporting and connecting and equipping or resourcing faith leaders for this particular moment. So everything's on Zoom, obviously, everything's technology. We have a weekly faith leaders online prayer huddle that a couple dozen folks have been joining us for. It's very informal, 45 minutes, an opportunity for some sharing back and forth. This is really about collegial support in this moment and reflection on some kind of poetry or scripture or something. We've led several kind of what we're calling Zoom meetups, focusing on different topics that we think are relevant. The first one was focusing on spiritual practices for spiritual leaders during COVID-19, just really aware that we need our faith leaders to be spiritually healthy, spiritually grounded, emotionally healthy for this particular moment. This moment is demanding a lot of them. So it's just really important for faith leaders to be intentional about their own spiritual practices so that they can be grounded and healthy enough to lead congregations. This past week, we led a Zoom meetup There was kind of an idea swap around Holy Week and Easter. So particularly for Christian clergy, we went through Palm Sunday, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter Sunday. Had several guests that shared a little bit about what they're thinking about and ways that they're experimenting, and then just open it up for some sharing among the group. This week on Tuesday, we have a Zoom meetup focusing on the spiritual practice of altering expectations, something we're all doing, adjusting our expectations in this moment. So we have a spiritual director who's a young Episcopal priest and a UCC pastor who are going to share a little bit about kind of how they see that topic. Altering expectations, excuse me, as a spiritual practice. And then we have several in the pipeline. So we're going to be looking at one on the topic of grief, realizing that we're all grieving different things in this moment. And it's okay to grieve, and acknowledging our grief is a really important step. And then coming up, we have one that we're really looking forward to that's an intergenerational conversation between an older, not older, but a senior clergy member and a younger person of faith, talking about wisdom revealed in the midst of COVID-19. Just some of I think there is a lot of wisdom for us in this moment. How do we capture some of that and share it so that we don't just lose it when we go back to business as usual? In many ways, I've been saying, I hope we don't go back to business as usual. There's so much about the way our society was working that wasn't working, So how can we learn the things we need to learn during this moment when we're all hitting the pause button, kind of regroup, hit the reset button, think about the values we want to live into, and move into the future differently than we were living before.
Absolutely, that's very helpful. I mean, how do we in this moment think reflectively, right, about, like I said, not just opportunities, but where we think within the Christian tradition of metanoia, right, about the directions we've taken in the past, but new directions afforded to us that we would call, traditionally translated as conversion, but really the Greek word meaning to choose a new direction, right? And how do we examine the directions or choices we've made, and how does this opportunity afford us the ability to perhaps make different kinds of choices as faith communities?
Yeah, I mean, as a Christian, it could not be more appropriate that this is happening during the season of Lent, and here we are stepping into Holy Week. This season calls us to that kind of self-reflection, calls us to that kind of repentance with changing direction, moving in a new direction. If we're paying attention and if we're prayerful, I really believe that God is revealing new things to us about what it means to be human beings in community and in relationship with the whole planet, and just in this crisis, like every crisis, it's the people who are most vulnerable and most marginalized who are experiencing the impact most deeply. It's really important for people with privilege like me to be thinking about how can we live differently so that all have what they need for basic survival.
Absolutely, thank you. I think that's actually a very helpful note for us to end on, which is for people to use, for fellow Christians like you and I, fellow privileged Christians like you and I, to take this week, this Holy Week, to think reflectively about both the blessings that's been afforded to us, and the kinds of decisions we need to be making as we move into the future. Decisions that are more cognizant, if you will, of those who have less privilege and are at more risk and greater risk than we are, and what kind of culture would we like to see that lifts them up, not just at a time of crisis, but actually as part of the social well-being.
And to ask God, what is it you are revealing to us? I'm not suggesting that God caused COVID-19 or the coronavirus to make us reflect in this way, but surely God is revealing something to us if we're paying attention, right?
Absolutely. Well, Alan, thank you very much. This was a very helpful conversation, and I wish you the best of luck both during this Holy Week. Extend my prayers to you and your community, as well as the work of the BTS Center.
And to you, thank you so much, Chris. Blessings.